She said the baby wasn't mine, but as I held that tiny borrowed face, staring back with eyes that remembered my every loss, I realized it belonged to none of us. It had come to claim us all. I used to imagine that the first time I heard a heartbeat that wasn't my own, I would cry. Maybe Lena would cry too. And we'd hold each other the way expectant parents do in those glossy brochures the clinic kept in its waiting room. After 3 years of appointments, injections, and the quiet strain that sits between two people who want something life keeps withholding, that small, rhythmic flutter on the ultrasound screen felt like a reward. For a while, we lived inside that reward. We argued gently over names, rearranged furniture in the spare room, and stood in baby stores debating between soft greens and pale blues for the nursery walls. Lena taped the first ultrasound picture to the refrigerator and touched it every morning like a ritual. I thought she was happy. Tired, yes. Overwhelmed, certainly. But happy. The shift began so subtly I almost missed it. At first, she just lingered in the nursery longer than before, running her fingers along the crib rail, humming a tune I didn't recognize. When I'd pass by the door, I'd catch snippets of her voice. Soft, deliberate murmurs as though she expected a response. I teased her once, asking if she was reading stories already. She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Just talking," she said. "Helps me bond." Bonding became hours. Hours became entire evenings. I'd come home from work and find her sitting in the rocking chair in the dim glow of the nightlight, her hands folded over her belly, her head angled as though listening to something only she could hear. When I asked what she'd been doing, she always said the same thing. "Just thinking." Intimacy dissolved next. She pulled away when I touched her shoulder or kissed her temple. Not in anger, more like she was startled, like I'd broken her concentration. She said she was tired, that her hormones made her feel disconnected. I tried to be patient, but something about her expression unsettled me. A kind of watchfulness, as though she expected something to happen at any moment. Then came the photographs. One afternoon, I found her on the living room floor, surrounded by old albums from her childhood, their pages splayed open like wings. She wasn't reminiscing. She was studying the pictures, staring at them with a focus I'd only ever seen her give to medical forms or work deadlines. When she looked up and realized I was watching, she snapped the nearest album shut so quickly dust lifted from its cover. "Just feeling nostalgic," she said. But her voice wavered. I didn't push. Maybe I should have. Everything broke open during dinner 2 weeks later. I had made pasta, trying to create some sense of normalcy between us. She barely touched her plate. Her fork scraped the ceramic each time she tried to speak, then fell silent again. "Alex." Her voice cracked. She pressed her palms together as though bracing herself. "I need to tell you something." I waited. Her eyes filled before the first word came out. "The baby isn't yours." For a moment, I didn't understand the sentence. It felt misplaced, as if she'd meant to tell me something else. Something ordinary, something solvable. But she kept going, tears running down her cheeks, explaining a work trip from months ago. A night she regretted so deeply she could barely speak about it now. It should have felt like a knife. Instead, it felt hollow, like falling through a step you thought was sturdy. I reached for logic the way a drowning man reaches for air. "We'll do a paternity test," I said softly. "After the birth. We'll sort it out." She shook her head, trembling. "Alex, that's not what I mean." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sonogram printout, the one from her latest appointment, the one she hadn't shown me yet. Her hand shook as she placed it in mine. "Look closer," she whispered. "It's not just not yours. It's not normal." The paper felt warm from her hand. The image inside felt cold. For 2 nights, I barely slept. The sonogram Lena had given me lay on my bedside table, and no matter how many times I told myself it was only a distorted image, my mind kept returning to the subtle wrongness of it. The suggestion of a face forming too early, the angles too sharp, the proportions too mature. I needed to see it with my own eyes, not through a secondhand printout belonging to a moment I wasn't allowed to witness. So when Lena said we had another appointment coming up, I insisted I was going with her. She didn't argue. If anything, she looked relieved, though not in the way I expected. More like someone who was finally ready to let someone else share a burden she'd already accepted. The clinic lights were bright in that sterile, almost ceremonial way, the walls covered with stock photos of smiling families. The technician greeted us kindly, though her expression shifted when she recognized our name. She asked a few soft questions, how Lena was feeling, whether the baby was moving, but her hands trembled slightly as she prepped the machine. Lena lay back, the gel glistening on her skin. I took her hand, though she didn't take mine back. When the wand touched her abdomen, the room filled with the familiar static whoosh, the baby's heartbeat. Strong, steady. The technician nodded once, as though reassuring herself. Then she adjusted the angle. The image sharpened. My own breath caught. The fetus was unmistakably formed, far more than the last time I'd seen it. But the face? Even the technician froze. The cheekbones were higher, more defined than any infant's should be. The eyes were set at a slant that didn't match either of us, and something about the spacing felt deliberate, as though the features belonged to someone older, someone fully grown, compressed into a form too small to hold them. The technician swallowed hard. Sometimes the machine catches shadows, she murmured. Let me try another angle. But every shift, every sweep of the wand produced the same unsettling symmetry. Not a blur, not an artifact. A face staring out from the void. Lena didn't react. She only watched, exhaling softly as though the confirmation of strangeness soothed her. The technician excused herself, returning with the doctor. He studied the screen with restrained calm before asking us to step into his office. There, surrounded by pamphlets on prenatal vitamins and genetic counseling, he spoke in measured tones about rare anomalies, possible overlaps, genetic irregularities that sometimes self-correct. He suggested further tests, blood work, advanced imaging, while tapping his pen against his notes like a nervous habit. Lena nodded silently. She didn't ask a single question. I did, or tried to, but the only words that made it out were, "Why does it look like that?" The doctor hesitated long enough that I noticed. "These things can appear dramatic on ultrasound," he finally said. "Fetal tissue shifts. Features look exaggerated. Let's not draw conclusions yet." But the face lingered in my mind, and it was not exaggerated. It was familiar. When we got home, Lena went straight to the nursery. I went to the living room cabinet, the one where she'd hastily shoved those old photo albums. Something about that face in the ultrasound tugged at a memory I didn't actually have, but had glimpsed once in an old photograph. A tall, thin figure standing behind Lena's grandmother in a faded group picture. No one had ever labeled him. Lena had mentioned once that he was a distant relative they didn't talk about. I opened the albums, flipping through page after page until I found it. That same relative, the same sharp cheekbones, the same uncanny eyes. Beneath the albums, tucked behind loose pages, I found a small wooden box secured with a tarnished latch. Inside were letters written in an elegant, slanted script, Lena's grandmother's handwriting. The earliest ones spoke lovingly about family. The later ones grew frantic, warning of the family curse, of old agreements, of a figure from folklore who chose hosts from their bloodline. One phrase repeated across several letters. "It borrows a womb, but not a life." I read until the words blurred. I didn't know what disturbed me more. The implication or the possibility that Lena had known all along. Night settled uneasily over the house. I must have fallen asleep sitting up because I woke to Lena's scream. She clutched her belly, breathless, trembling. I rushed to her side, gathering her into my arms. Her skin was cold, her nightshirt soaked with sweat. "The dream," she gasped. "It was right there." Before I could ask what she meant, the baby kicked, so violently that Lena bent forward with a cry. And then, in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, her stomach shifted. A shape pressed against her skin. Not a hand, a face, looking directly at me. For days after seeing the face pressed against Lena's skin, I moved through our home in a state somewhere between dread and duty. I couldn't bring myself to mention what I'd seen. Not to her, not even aloud to myself. But the image replayed behind every blink. A face that was neither infant nor fully formed. Neither hers nor mine. Something borrowed. Something remembering. When Lena wasn't looking, I began researching. Not the casual kind of searching someone does after a strange doctor's appointment, but the sort of hidden, anxious digging reserved for doomed possibilities. Forums filled with grainy ultrasound images led nowhere. Medical sites dismissed distortions as harmless quirks of light and fluid. Only one thread caught my attention. A years-old post by someone describing a fetus with mature features that didn't match either parent. The replies were filled with speculation. Chimerism, mosaic inheritance, undetected donors. Buried near the bottom was a response from a geneticist who claimed to work with atypical developmental cases. I reached out, sending the sonogram image with shaking hands. Hours later, he replied with a terse message asking for a private call. His voice on the line was calm, almost too calm. He spoke about biological chimeras, individuals carrying cells from another person. It could happen naturally, he said. It could create mismatches. But then he added with evident reluctance. There are cases, very rare, undocumented, where paternal markers don't match any known relative, as though the father isn't traceable in any genetic database, an anomaly outside conventional patterns. Outside how? I asked. A pause. Beyond explanation, he murmured before ending the call. Lena, during all this, drifted further from me. She spent long stretches in the rocking chair, her hand stroking her stomach rhythmically. When I asked how she was feeling, she answered in vague fragments. She said the dreams were more vivid now, that the baby spoke to her. When I pressed for details, she whispered, almost matter-of-factly, "It uses my grandmother's voice. She tells me not to fear it. She says the child remembers us." The child remembers. The phrase clung to me like a damp cloth. When Lena suggested visiting her childhood home for the weekend, to clear my head, she said. I agreed. I hoped distance would give us clarity. Instead, the house offered more shadows. Her parents had passed away years ago, leaving the house untouched, dust settling over every frame and cabinet. The upstairs attic held an ache of stale air and memories. While Lena rested downstairs, I climbed up, curiosity tightening around my ribs. The attic was a museum of her family's lineage. Trunks filled with lace, brittle photographs, and stacks of journals whose spines curled with age. I opened one at random. The handwriting matched the letters I had found earlier. Her grandmother's. As I read, my pulse quickened. Generations of women described the same phenomenon. Pregnancies marked by unusual dreams. Children born with faces resembling deceased relatives. Infants who whispered in voices adults shouldn't recognize. They called them children of the threshold, beings that walked the line between memory and flesh, borrowing forms familiar to the family's grief. Each journal spoke of the same entity, an heirloom of sorrow passed through maternal blood. Not demons, not monsters, echoes. One entry chilled me most, a detailed description of an ultrasound from decades ago. A face not born of flesh, but of remembered sorrow pressing against the mother's skin. It was exactly what I had seen. I brought the journal downstairs. Lena was sitting on the sofa, a blanket over her lap, her expression distant. When I placed the journal beside her, she didn't even flinch. She only sighed as though she had expected this moment. I lied, she said quietly. About the affair. Her voice trembled, but not with guilt. With fear. I didn't know how else to make you stay away from this. From what I did. She told me about the work trip. Not a trip at all, but a pilgrimage to an old family shrine. A place her grandmother had begged her never to visit. She had been curious, desperate for hope after our years of failed attempts. There was a ritual there, she said. A prayer for fertility. A promise made in exchange for a child that would come through the veil. She hadn't believed it would work. She hadn't believed it would answer. I struggled to speak. Lena, what did you invite? Before she could answer, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. In the tall mirror across the room, I caught a glimpse of her reflection. Her body curled slightly, her hand over her stomach. Her belly rippled, not with the flutter of a kick, but with shifting contours, as though a new face were forming beneath her skin, rising toward the surface. A face I knew instantly. A face I had not seen in over 20 years. My mother, staring back at me. For 2 days after seeing my mother's face rising beneath Lena's skin, I lived in a kind of numb obedience, saying the right words, making the right meals, pretending the world had not tilted on its axis. But inside, something was unraveling. I no longer trusted my senses, and yet the unease was so sharp it left a physical ache in my chest. I needed proof. Something outside my own fear. Something external. Late one night, while Lena slept upstairs, I set up small cameras in the corners of the nursery. Hidden among stuffed animals and on the shelf behind the rocking chair, their tiny green indicators muted beneath tape. I told myself it was to understand what was happening to her. To us. The first night, nothing happened. She didn't enter the nursery at all. But on the second night, long after the house had settled into silence, she slipped inside. The footage shook me. She rocked in the chair, but her arms were empty, cradling nothing. Yet her body swayed with the deliberate rhythm of someone soothing a restless infant. She sang softly, not in English, but in a dialect I recognized only faintly from the journals and letters in the attic. A language older than her grandmother, older than even the stories recorded in those brittle pages. Her abdomen rose and fell in time with her breaths, but occasionally, just at the edges of the camera's sightline, it moved in ways that weren't synchronized with her body. A creeping bulge, a sliding shadow, as though something inside her was responding to the lullaby. When I confronted her the next morning, my voice barely held steady. Lena, I need to know everything. No more lies. No more shielding me. She hesitated, then quietly agreed to speak to someone. Not a doctor, she insisted, but someone who understands this. That was how we ended up meeting with a man named Rowan Hart, introduced to me through a grief counseling forum. He looked ordinary enough. Gentle eyes, a notebook always in hand. But his questions were unsettlingly pointed. He asked about lineage, emotional wounds, places tied to loss. When Lena mentioned her grandmother's shrine, something in his expression hardened in recognition. Finally, he closed the notebook and folded his hands. You've encountered a threshold child, he said, his voice steady, as though reciting a historical fact rather than diagnosing the impossible. They are echoes of the unliving, fragments of the departed drawn to the vulnerable. They do not create life. They inhabit it. He explained that such entities feed not on the mother's body, but on her grief, shaping themselves from memory, longing, and unresolved sorrow. They root through bloodlines, taking features from the father's lineage not to survive, but to anchor themselves in the physical world. As he spoke, Lena began to tremble. I didn't mean to invite anything, she whispered. I only wanted hope. I turned toward her, trying to understand. Tell me what really happened, Lena. Her eyes filled with tears. She described the shrine in halting detail. Candles that wouldn't stay lit, offerings that seemed to vanish the moment her eyes closed, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched by someone she loved. Her grandmother, she thought. In desperation, she had whispered a plea for a child. But the presence that answered was colder, older, hungry. It wasn't her, Lena said. It was something tied to her grief, and mine. The affair, she confessed, had been an invented barrier, to distance me from the truth, to make me step away before the thing growing inside her could attach itself to me as well. But it was far too late for that. A week later, at her next medical appointment, the air in the exam room felt taut with a sense of expectancy. The technician had grown familiar with us, though her smiles had become tighter over the past visits. Lena reclined, gel shining under the overhead lights, while I sat beside her, fingers gripping the armrest. The ultrasound flickered to life. At first, the fetus drifted in the soft, grainy darkness, still serene. Then, with a suddenness that made the technician gasp, it turned. Fully, deliberately, toward the probe. Its eyes opened, two pools of complete black swallowing every glimmer of light on the screen. The technician froze, her hand hovering above the control panel. And then the small, defined mouth moved, forming shapes, words, silent but unmistakably articulate. The technician swallowed hard. It looked like it said your name. There was no audio recording running, but I heard it anyway, somewhere deep inside my bones. After the ultrasound, after watching those black eyes form the shape of my name, my sense of reality began to thin, like frost melting unevenly on glass. Every corner of the house felt occupied by something unseen. Every reflection lingered too long. I moved through my days with a hollow alertness, waiting for the next fracture. It started with the cries. Late at night, when Lena slept in fitful, trembling bursts, I would hear the sound of an infant somewhere in the house. Soft at first, then rising, as though searching for attention. I'd race to the nursery only to find it still, the rocking chair unmoving, stuffed animals staring blankly into the dark. The monitors captured nothing, but the cries followed me back down the hallway, echoing in the walls long after they should have faded. Then came the faces. Walking through the grocery store, I saw my father's stern gaze flicker over the features of a man comparing soup cans. On my drive home, a child on a crosswalk smiled with the exact tilt of my sister's mouth, the sister I had buried before she reached adulthood. Each time I blinked, their faces snapped back into their original forms, but the momentary resemblance was too exact to dismiss. It felt as though the world was becoming porous, memories bleeding into the edges of reality. And the entity feeding inside my wife was the center of that growing gravitational pull. Lena sensed it too. Her health was deteriorating visibly. Her skin had grown pale and papery, her eyes shadowed. She clutched her belly with a mixture of fear and devotion I couldn't decipher. "It's choosing," she whispered to me one night. "Taking pieces, not just from me, from both of us, from everyone we've lost. It's weaving something from our grief, Alex. It wants to be whole." Dark lines branched across her abdomen. Veins darkened to the color of bruised roots, spreading like a creeping vine. When I touched her skin, she winced in pain. The entity responded to her discomfort with violent kicks that seemed almost communicating displeasure. Desperate, we returned to the attic journals. One entry described a cleansing, a ritual intended not to remove the entity but to weaken its hold. It involved smoke, invocation, and a plea to sever the line of return. We tried it. We lit sage in the nursery, its bitter smell swirling around us. Lena recited the journal's fragile, looping incantations while I traced the symbols drawn in the margins. The air thickened, growing heavy like humidity before a storm. For a moment, I thought the room might soften, the tension loosening from Lena's face. Then she screamed. Her back arched, hands clutching her stomach. The dark veins surged outward, branching across her limbs. Her skin rippled with movement. Not the flutter of a child, but the shifting of something assembling itself. The ritual had not banished the entity. It had fed it. That night, I dreamt of holding a newborn wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Its weight was warm in my arms, comforting even. But when I looked down, its face was not singular. It shifted fluidly, changing from my father's features to my grandmother's, then to my sister's. Each transformation was smooth, seamless, as though the child were trying on identities like clothing. And through every shift, its eyes remained the same, dark and fathomless. When I awoke gasping, Lena lay beside me, staring at the ceiling. "It isn't cruel," she whispered. "It doesn't understand cruelty. It only wants to exist, to become everything we've lost. It's not taking from me out of malice. It's taking because it must. If it stops, it will unravel. It will disappear." I realized then what she had understood all along. The entity's birth required a sacrifice, a mother's soul for a family's resurrection, an eternal reunion for the dead, paid for by the living. Her contractions began the next evening, far too early. The hospital room blurred with motion as nurses surrounded her. I held her hand as the fetal monitor spiked erratically, the rhythmic beeping climbing higher, faster. Lena's grip tightened around mine, her breath a trembling shudder. The doctor rushed in, staring at the screen with disbelief. "The heartbeat," he muttered. "It's syncing with yours." Then his expression twisted into something almost fearful as he glanced at the ultrasound feed. "My goodness, the face? It's changing again." He turned the monitor toward us. "It's wearing your features now," he said, voice barely steady. "As though it's rewriting itself. Into you." The delivery room felt wrong the moment we entered it. Not dangerous, not at first, but off. As though something unseen had taken its place among the medical staff, breathing in rhythm with the machines. The fluorescent lights flickered in steady intervals, casting ripples of shadow across the walls. A cold draft swept through the room despite the thermostat reading warm. One nurse shivered, rubbing her arms, whispering about an air vent malfunction. Another frowned at the monitors as static briefly distorted the ultrasound screen, replacing the grayscale fluid with the faint outlines of old family portraits. Faces from Lena's inherited albums, blinking in and out like ghosts caught between channels. Lena gripped the sides of the bed, her breathing shallow, her skin almost translucent under the harsh lights. When the contractions surged, she screamed. Not words of pain, but phrases I recognized from the journals. Lines written by her grandmother, her great-grandmother, women I had never known but now felt terrifyingly close. "Hold me," she begged between gasps. "Don't let it take too much." I held her as tightly as I dared, feeling each tremor rattle through her bones. The doctor called out measured instructions, but his voice faded beneath the rhythmic hum of something older unfolding in the room. The air grew heavy, charged. A nurse dropped a tray. Metal instruments clattered across the floor, their reflections showing distorted faces that didn't match the people standing above them. When Lena pushed, the lights flared so brightly it was as if the room itself inhaled. And then, suddenly, silence. The child emerged not with a cry, but with a long, soft sigh that felt impossibly deliberate. The doctor froze for a moment, awe or fear freezing his hands before he lifted the baby and gently placed it on Lena's chest. It was small, perfectly formed, human in every limb and movement. It was the face that stole my breath. Lena's eyes stared up at me from its soft features, wide and familiar. But beneath them lay the curve of my mother's brow, the uncertain furrow she had worn in her final months. The jawline was mine, unmistakably, but softened by the faint dimple that had belonged to Lena's grandmother. The smile, if it could be called that, was delicate and eerie, an echo of too many memories stitched into one delicate expression, as if stitched from our grief. The baby, our child, though the term felt both true and untrue, latched onto Lena the moment its skin touched hers. Her breath hitched. Color drained from her cheeks so swiftly I watched the warmth vanish in real time, as though the newborn were drawing life directly through its gaze. Its eyes gleamed unnaturally bright, reflecting not the hospital lights, but something deeper, something remembering. "Alex?" Lena's voice was a thin thread. "It's feeding." Doctors bustled around us, attributing her faintness to blood loss, exhaustion, trauma. They wrapped the baby in a pale blanket, its patchwork face relaxing into a strange serenity. The medical staff saw nothing beyond the physical. They did not see what I saw, the subtle shift of features beneath its skin, as though settling into its chosen form, anchoring itself. Lena survived, but the woman who opened her eyes afterward was changed, hollowed. She stared at our child with reverence and trepidation. "I see them," she whispered when the nurses stepped out. "All of them. In its smiles, in its coos. They're here, Alex. The dead. The ones we loved. The ones who answered." Her hand trembled as she passed the baby to me. "You have to raise it. Keep it close. If we abandon it, it will seek others. It will find new vessels. It will keep remaking itself. We can contain it. That's all we can do now." Contain. Not save. Not love. Contain. I agreed. Not from bravery, not even from devotion, but from a deeper dread. Leaving the child felt unimaginable. Not because it needed us, but because I knew what it had the power to become if unmoored. So I documented everything. Every shifting expression, every unsettling dream, every moment where the child's face flickered into someone long buried. I told the support group I found online that I was managing grief. In truth, I was cataloging something else entirely. A curse inherited through lineage, a shadow wearing innocence like a mask. And tonight, as I sit in the dim nursery, the baby sleeping in the cradle I once built with hope instead of fear, I write my final entry. She said the baby wasn't mine, but as I held that tiny borrowed face, staring back with eyes that remembered my every loss, I realized it belonged to none of us. It had come to claim us all.